From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I say that at a time when the tax burden on the wealthy is at its lowest level in half a century, the most fortunate among us can afford to pay a little more. I don't need another tax cut. Warren Buffett doesn't need another tax cut.
As the president defends his compromise plan to reduce the deficit, we'll talk to Congressmember Raul Grijalva, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. While a great deal is made of conservative Paul Ryan's budget, why do we hear nothing about the people's budget? Then we host a roundtable on the state of the American economy with Reverend Jim Wallace. He's on a hunger strike to protest the congressional budget cuts.
Pray and fast, each of us in our own way, for mercy, compassion, wisdom, strength, and courage as we make the critical budget choices about who and what are most important.
We'll also speak with Tom Frank. He wrote The Wrecking Crew, How Conservatives Rule, and Grace Lee Boggs.
In Detroit in particular, people are beginning to say, the only way to survive is by taking care of one another, by recreating our relationships to one another. That we have created a society over the last period in particular where each of us is pursuing self-interest. We have devolved as human beings.
Grace Lee Boggs is 96 years old. She's written the book, The Next American Revolution, Sustainable Activism for the 21st Century. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Obama's unveiled a goal to cut the U.S. budget deficit by $4 trillion over the next 12 years. In a televised address, Obama countered Republican budget plans with what he said was a more balanced approach, reliant in part on the rolling back of Bush-era tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans.
In December, I agreed to extend the tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans because it was the only way I could prevent a tax hike on middle-class Americans. But we cannot afford $1 trillion worth of tax cuts for every millionaire and billionaire in our society. We can't afford it. And I refuse to renew them again.
Republicans quickly declared a tax increase for the rich as a non-starter. This is House Speaker John Boehner.
I think the president heard us loud and clear. If we're going to resolve our differences and do something meaningful, raising taxes will not be part of that.
We'll have more on Obama's deficit proposal after headlines. Libyan rebels are reporting heavy casualties in an attack by pro-Gaddafi forces in the city of Misrata. At least 23 people were reportedly killed when rockets hit a residential area earlier today. The rebels are warning of a massacre unless the NATO-led force steps up attacks on Gaddafi's fighters around the city. The Pentagon, meanwhile, has acknowledged the U.S. continues to play a major role in the attack on the Libyan government. U.S. forces have flown 35% of all air missions in Libya over the last 10 days, including bombing runs, surveillance, and refueling operations. NATO assumed formal control of the bombing campaign earlier this month. In Pakistan, at least 6 people were killed Wednesday in a U.S. drone strike against alleged Taliban militants. The attack came just 2 days after the Pakistani government requested the CIA limit the drone attacks and also provide a complete list of CIA employees and contractors in Pakistan. The strikes are the first since a mid-March bombing that reportedly killed scores of civilians. Speaking before Parliament, Pakistani Prime Minister Yusuf Gilani condemned the attacks.
हम उनको कायल कर रहे हैं कि ये ड्रोन अटैक्स हमारे लिए प्रॉब्लम्स क्रिएट कर रहे हैं आप कन्विंस करें
We are persuading them that these drone attacks are creating problems for us. You convince them, and we are also telling them that it is making our work difficult. I want to assure you that this diplomatic channel is putting pressure on them, and they will be compelled to end this.
Over 24 members of Congress are joining a nationwide fast to protest budget cuts targeting the poor and the hungry domestically and abroad. The group includes 14 congresswomen who say cuts to poverty-focused international relief programs will directly impact women and girls worldwide. Federal regulators have reached agreements with the nation's largest mortgage providers to address fraudulent practices in loans and foreclosures. The deals call for compensating borrowers who suffered financial harm, but no details details have been worked out. Companies would also be forced to provide a single point of contact for borrowers and would not be able to foreclose on those whose loans have been modified. But no concrete financial penalties would be immediately imposed, and no companies would be forced to reduce borrowers' mortgage debt. Government officials say the deal won't undermine a separate attempt by the attorneys general from all 50 states to reach a financial settlement from lenders for submitting fraudulent documents to force thousands of people out of their homes. In a statement, Democratic Congressmember Maxine Waters of California called the deals, quote, disappointing but not surprising given the history of our nation's banking regulators. A Senate panel's released a new report on the causes of the nation's financial crisis. The report singles out a number of agencies and companies, including Deutsche Bank, the former Washington Mutual Bank, the U.S. Office of Thrift Supervision, and the credit rating agencies Moody's and Standard & Poor's. The firm Goldman Sachs also comes under intense criticism for misleading clients and Congress about its marketing of mortgage-backed securities while privately betting on their future failure. Levin says he's referred his findings to the Justice Department and federal regulators for potential criminal investigation. Thousands of people rallied at the Michigan Capitol in Lansing Wednesday to protest Republican proposals to roll back labor rights and cut government services. Organizers put attendance at over 10,000. Herb Sanders of the American Federation of State, County, Municipal Employees urged the crowd to begin recall campaigns against Governor Rick Snyder and other top Republicans.
We will recall the scoundrels one by one. If their agenda is keeping money in the pocket of fat cat corporate CEOs as opposed to keeping working Americans employed at fair wages with decent health care and decent schools in our neighborhoods, they've got to go.
In Wisconsin, a number of teachers have received punishments for taking part in a walkout against Governor Scott Walker's anti-union bill. Classes were canceled February 18th after teachers called in sick to join protests in Madison. Some of the teachers have received suspensions of up to 15 days. In Syria, over 2,000 women, children, and students blocked a major coastal road Wednesday to demand the release of hundreds of men rounded up in government crackdowns. Around 100 people were released in an attempt to appease the protest. Meanwhile, an estimated 500 people rallied in two prominent Syrian universities. Protesters are demanding government reforms and an end to the country's decades-old emergency laws. In Yemen, 6 people were killed Wednesday when government forces clashed with troops loyal to the opposition. Hundreds of thousands of people, meanwhile, took to the streets in the ongoing protests against President Ali Abdullah Saleh. The Palestinian authorities claiming momentum towards its effort to declaring an independent Palestinian state following a number of international endorsements. In recent reports, the United Nations and International Monetary Fund say the PA is ready to run an independent state. The UN report concludes the main obstacle, however, remains, quote, the persistence of the Israeli occupation and the conflict's unresolved issues. At an international meeting in Brussels, Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad said Palestinian statehood has been given a birth certificate.
What I myself called at the meeting a birth, what amounts to effectively a birth certificate for the reality of Palestinian statehood. We feel it's very important for the political process to take advantage of what today's meeting has concluded. The fact that we Palestinians have crossed the threshold of readiness for statehood.
And in Uruguay, senators have voted to annul a law granting amnesty for crimes committed under the country's 1973 to 1985 dictatorship. Macarena Gelman, the daughter of a dictatorship victim, praised the vote.
This is only the beginning, because once there is justice, you can act freely, and we are just now able to start down that path.
The measure now goes to Uruguay's lower house, which approved a similar bill last year. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
And welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around